Okay, so we don't know how many times life has accomplished it exactly, but for sure the first ones were the insects, 300 to 350 million years ago. Then were the pterosaurs in the late Triassic. Then, as for recent knowledge, a small group of dinosaurs in the late Jurassic did, in a really familiar fashion. Most importantly, 150 million years ago, a lineage of theropod dinosaurs did, and having survived the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, have taken the niches left empty by pterosaurs and called them home ever since. Next ones in line were mammals. 55 million years ago, the first known bats have lifted off the ground, marking the last time active life evolved until 17th of December 1903. Bats, being the youngest flesh-composed sky dwellers in the world completely dominated by modern saurians, had to find themselves a really specific niche. A nocturnal predator living in pitch-black structures in crowded colonies that, by the way, is completely blind. Like, come on, who wants to be that guy? I mean, you always could be a fruit bat, but that's gay and does nothing to segue to the topic at hand. But you already know where this is going, so I guess it will have to do. Urban Chaos Riot Response is an insane game about cops, gangs, explosions and police brutality. One of the most insane things about it is that it was released in 2006 exclusively for PS2 and Xbox, which is why it sold about 15 copies. But it showed promise. Promise taken up by Eidos and Warner. One that led to Rocksteady working on their first big boy project. Arkham Asylum is a game made by a team that had something to prove. Prove that Batman video game in fact good maybe. I won't tell you if they nailed the style of the comics, possibly, but they for sure made one good looking game. Arkham Island is drenched not only in rain, but also in atmosphere. Is it gothic? Noir? Couldn't tell. But wherever Rocksteady was going with it, they got there. Every single room, corridor, sewer canal is meticulously detailed and looks great. I guess this is what happens when devs are not forced to create worlds the size of fucking Belgium. Too bad that the third of the screen is permanently occupied by the stiff walking rodent man, but it's not that big of a deal. Game trying to give me seizures is, each time the world's greatest detective decides to see the world his way, the screen flashes. Aggressively. Aggressively enough that I was getting headaches. There are mods for it on PC, but on console the only remedy seems to be closing your eyes for a second. Either way, as the story progresses, Batman's cape becomes more and more torn. After each fight, a cloud of bats zooms out of the frame, and when you fail, a villain will mock you for it. You know, the little things. Speaking of villains, Joker is great, which comes as no surprise since he was played by...
There's something about scary clowns, you know, that
Arkham Asylum introduces itself as a beat-em-up, and it often is one, but it's also a stalking simulator, fever dream creator, and Arkham explorator, but all in due time. The man is not only a bat, but also a glass cannon. He is quite unparalleled in hand-to-hand combat. It is composed mostly of 3 buttons, and to be quite honest, most of those encounters can be just button mashed through. Batman will snap to the enemies and perform slick animations like it's nothing, and it feels good. It does pay to time punches, counters and batarangs however, as proper curve builds up combo, earns points and allows to buy combat adjacent upgrades. The glassness of the cannon shows when facing goons with guns. A few is more than enough for the bat to bite the dust. Those encounters take place in arenas with hidden paths, interactable props and surrounded by gargoyles for the man-bat to sit on and stalk his prey. Those sections stand in contrast to the button-mashy B1 punchy scuffles. Here, you have to be aware of your surroundings, utility of your gadgets and how to separate the herd of goons to ease the hunt. You are vengeance, you are the knight, you are the man. Lee Private Investigator, the best one to ever be. This aspect of Batman's character means that every now and then you get to scan a scene for a clue which can be tracked, leading you like a breadcrumb trail to where the story needs you to be. Like for example, the Scarecrow fight. Overhyped to shit. That's what it is. It's really pretty, look how pretty it is, but that can only get you so far, and repeating the same section 3 times with some rushed variation is pushing it in my book, okay? There's also Bane, to whom you'll have to get used to, as almost every other boss and more ferocious enemy is also Bane, because of story reasons, of course. But I'd be hesitant in jumping to any harmful conclusions, as both cases of reuse seem to be motivated by time-efficient design rather than laziness, the latter more so than the former.
Most species of bats use echolocation to both navigate and find prey. For them to achieve this version of sonar, the inner parts of their skulls have suitably expanded. They support extra throat muscles and voice boxes necessary for high-frequency calls. Also, bats have evolved large cochleas, thus expanding the inner ear area containing nerves that transmit information to the brain.
Dude, my man, I am doing a thing here, right?
So am I. I exist to provide structure in both senses.
What?
I am here to help the viewer draw parallels on which this whole thing is based on, and to introduce the concept of structure itself.
What the fuck are you talking about? The grand, oh yeah, now I get it, moment happens early in the campaign. Right after the introductory set pieces and combat sections, you are set free to enjoy the first breaths of fresh air thus far in the game. So naturally, you go to the biggest building that just happens to be directly in front of you. Unfortunately, you get turned around, and as doors close behind you, it turns out that your car needs you. You open the map, realize the size, and that's when it sinks in. You have just been Metroidvania'd. Arkham Asylum's map itself is microscopic compared not only to ours, but also to its contemporaries. It's really just a couple of buildings and a patio, but this scale allows for attention to detail that I was praising so highly earlier. And this tiny island is to be appreciated many times over. Not only thanks to many little trinkets waiting to be found, but most importantly, thanks to the Metroidvanian design recontextualizing the environment. You will be traversing the same buildings each time with new gadgets that expand Batman's moveset, opening new paths. Familiar places will start to look and feel different, with shifted vibes and new environmental hazards. And the island itself, as story progresses, will shift from madhouse under quarantine in tight grip of its guards to the weirdest place to be taking a walk. In all fairness, it is linear, but at least in my book, the entire genre kind of is. It just holds a looser grip on player, allowing for the illusion of agency to form. And seeing it in a almost modern, fully 3D world, purpose-built with proper budget feels really refreshing. So I'm pretty safe to say that Batman video game in fact good for sure. Arkham Asylum must have struck a chord, because in 2010 Rocksteady got bought by Warner, and in 2011 Arkham City hit the shelves. And this haste makes Arkham City even more impressive than it already is. It's beautiful, moody, drenched in atmosphere, and there is much more to see than the city itself. This game feels like a straight up continuation of Asylum, like they opened the Unreal project and just continued on. And this comes both with the bad, which is Batman's screen real estate, and the good, which is everything else. The beat-em-up combat retains the spectacle of Batman's animations as the main source of satisfaction, and proper timing as the main requirement of skill. It has been sped up, and Batman snaps to enemies at sometimes ridiculous radius, making the combat even more button mushy, but fun nonetheless. Sneaky combat has been affected much more. Firstly, due to changes in structure of the Batman experience, about which I will talk later, lots of gadgets and moves that you had to earn in the Asylum are now unlocked from the get-go, making it feel like a continuation in the most direct way possible. Really cool to play one right after the other. Secondly, there is more stuff. More moves, more gadgets, leveling up system has been expanded, and armed thugs became less dangerous. Batman is still far from bulletproof, but all that expands the combat systems, allowing for both more sneaky and more aggressive playstyles. This time around, the Bat is not alone. You'll be playing both as Robin and Catwoman. The former is not that interesting, as he does the same stuff as Batman does, just with different animations, and the latter feels different but not nearly as good. Her gadgets are neat but few, and the way she traverses the city feels junky and undercooked, and it's fine, as she only gets like a few sections while the Bat gets 2 entire fucking games at this point.
It might come as a surprise to most people, especially living in the moderate and colder climate. Bats are far from everyday sight, but there are over 1,400 species of them, making Chiroptera the second largest order of mammals, composing about 20% of the entire...
Arkham City claim to fame is the way it treats its villains. There would be no Batman without his adversaries, and this codependency has been shown in the game. In my taste, some of them rely on the swarms of mobs too much, but how else do you turn up to 11 and fucking beat him up? Well, you could use the other side of Batman's combat system and make a Mr. Freeze fight, but I guess you can pull that move only once, so bosses range from pretty good to really good, and all are engaging, if not by design, then by aesthetic. You really should just play it, you know? The biggest diversion from Arkham's Asylum approach is the city of Arkham itself. It is many times larger, and I guess one of the victims of this expansion was the Metroidvanian structure. What succeeded it is a open world approach with all expected strings attached. Side missions, the ever-present compass, point markers, the works. The main story is, as expected, a stream of objectives and set pieces sprinkled across the map, but now, equally as expected, you're tempted left and right with activities and side stories. How often do you come back to the main story, and how long breaks from it you take has no impact on anything. Expected thrice. What I find really puzzling is how nobody at Rocksteady has risen a brow at the idea of putting a story with a very clearly defined timer into this framework. Game tells you that Batman has like 7 hours until the big thing happens, and the moment cutscene ends, it takes away any urgency with it. A Dead Rising style countdown timer where you would have to decide on what you can or can't do during that one crazy night would be really great, but my brother in Christ, I can't review what's not there. But as far as open worlds go, this one is pretty fucking good for a few reasons. Firstly, the vibe. I talked about it, and there's a good chance that you have eyeballs, at least I hope so. Secondly, the scale. Map is about 5 times the size of one from Asylum. It's still absolutely tiny by even 2011 standards. To me, it's a perk by itself. But quality side quests and well-designed puzzles scattered around every corner complete the package very nicely. Last but not least, how you interact with it. There was a lot of effort put into this world, and game wants your eyes down there. So, your main way of traversal is gliding, not active flight. You can pull yourself to building edges and gain some momentum, which requires a little bit of planning ahead. It's not a look towards a thing on a compass and walk kind of thing. It's active and engaging. Speaking of compass, you can ignore it as your set destination will be also marked by a gigantic bat signal on the sky. You know, keep your eyes down there.
Preying on insects in the dark of night is what allowed bats to conquer the entire world, uncompetitive by bird insectivores and ones of prey. Since both rely on their sight, bats have expanded and began to diverge. Famous vampire bats are believed to once feed on ticks and other parasites before becoming one. Not unlike oxpeckers, there are also bats that specialized in drinking nectar in clear convergence to butterflies and hummingbirds. This shows that any group of animals that takes to the skies is under selective pressure and always lands in familiar places.
Arkham Knight was a real technical showcase for its time, and it came with a price. Nowadays, you can force the infamous PC port into submission, but on console it runs the previous gen code path with accordingly capped frames and resolution that I don't think could be saved with any amount of anti-aliasing. Usually, I don't mention this kind of crap, but the other victims of progress bothered me a bit. I hope it captured well, but there is something about some materials or reflections or soft shadows or some things are rendered that, like, for sure is not right. But from far away enough, it looks fine. More than fine. Great, even. There is a obvious technological jump since Arkham City. The rain, the smoke, particle effects, most of the reflections cooperate in rendering the moodiest, noirest, the most rotten city for a good cop to lose hope in. In motion is when all these things show their best side, and I really struggle to comprehend how this game is nearing decade old. There has also been a shift in art style. World seems to be more grounded than before, not by much. It's not realistic exactly. For example, Batman is no longer a buff guy in great pajamas and some trinkets by his belt. He is covered head to toe in armor and high-tech gadgets that supposedly turn him from human to superhuman. Game also goes to great lengths to justify his abilities, both in visual design and exposition dumps. I guess the best twist that Arkham Knight throws at you is that Batman is not the titular guy. Said guy is the villain of the story, and a real cardboard cutout at that. He comes out as incompetent and whiny, in a stark contrast to how he is talked up to be. As the story begins to wrap up, game throws some really obvious hints as to who he might be before the big reveal, and don't worry, I won't spoil it. This entire Knight character really stinks compared to the delightful Mark Hamill's Joker. Luckily, he is still here. Not only is he back, but he's accompanying Batman every step of the way, continuously taunting and mocking the poor guy. This rendition of the Joker is hands down the most entertaining villain I have ever faced. And this applies to the entire Rocksteady trilogy. But it is in this game where we get to spend the most time with him, and it's glorious. Joker is also at several occasions the centerpiece of really creative, interactive sequences that showcase Batman's screwed up mind, but I will not spoil them. You should just play the fucking game, dude, alright? Speaking of, once again, the core of the next Arkham experience proves consistent and
evolutionary.
The punching, the flying, the stalking, it's all more than familiar at this point. The clear difference in approach between sneaky and punchy has been blurred, however, as now with new enemy types including healers or tanks and gadgets that let you sabotage their equipment and plant traps, it pays to make sure that the grunts are ripe for the picking before jumping in. The best, and at the same time the worst addition to the combat system
is the multi-takedown.
It allows Bruce to knock up to 6 guys provided you surprise them and did some silent attacks beforehand. It is completely OP, and both of the qualifiers do a decent job at de-emphasizing the fists blazing approach. But then again, maybe that was the point. It also looks rad as fuck. Arkham Knight
continues down the path
of City, and Batman became yet again more nimble. Punches feel even snappier. He's able to scale skyscrapers in seconds and glide ridiculous distances with little effort. Although it is the default, active and world-fitting mode of transport, it is not the only one, as now
he also has a car.
And this thing is such a joy to ride, more thanks to the vibes rather than the handling, and to transform into a tank. Arkham is swarmed with an army of remotely controlled drone tanks that can be destroyed guilt-free. Arkham Knight, not the guy, also lets you immerse yourself as the world's greatest detective with reworked detective minigames, including one that I will bet my bottom złoty has inspired Cyberpunk's brain dances. Good stuff. Arkham Knight is an open-world game in pretty much
all the ways you'd expect.
Yet again, the map grew to 5 km square, or if you most likely had no attention span to watch this video to this point, just shy of Fortnite's map size. So far from its contemporaries as far as Blood goes. Not only that, in my humble opinion, the best thing about this game is how it paces itself. Both the main story and side content, in order to be accessible, require some intel, radio call, finding something in the environment, hearing something, etc. Of course, some of it is going to be on timer or waiting for certain completion threshold of something else, but it leads to the illusion of figuring stuff out. Here, some examples. Here, I have seen an armored vehicle zooming by, the kind that needs to get scrapped. So I got into the Batmobile, activated the quest, and started the pursuit. Here, as I was on my way to another activity, I have heard a screech of a giant bat that I was hunting for. So I got to work. Oh, what's that giant column of smoke? Better check it out. Oh my, it's a B-list Batman villain. Keep your eyes and ears open. Stuff is happening all around. And since every storyline and challenge depends on intel, you're gonna alternate between all of them and the main story. And it just builds up a feeling of juggling a bunch of stuff and barely holding together the city in the craziest, rainiest and darkest night of Batman's life. And that, not the graphics, is how this game has not aged a day. It takes a lot to stand out, to carve a niche in psyche of millions, to have the courage and faith in your approach to stand in category of your own. It takes a lot to evolve, to leverage, to adapt to outside's pressures, to selectively comply to the world around, to understand the way forward. And lastly, it takes a lot to outcompete, to prove worth of your approach and interpretation, to widen your niche until it fits everyone. But at the end of the day,
Every single one that follows down that path ends up in familiar...
Jesus Christ, fucking finally. Take care.